What does it actually mean to have political power? Not just a seat at the table, not just a name on a ballot, but real, durable influence over the conditions shaping your community. That question is worth sitting with, because most conversations about progress stop at representation. Get enough people elected, the thinking goes, and change will follow. But here is where that assumption starts to break down. Political influence without an organized economic foundation underneath it tends to become symbolic rather than structural. It can look like progress while leaving the deeper architecture of inequality completely untouched. Now, this is not an argument against voting. Voting matters. Public office matters. Running for school boards, city councils, and state legislatures matters enormously. But those tools work best when they are paired with something equally serious, which is economic capacity. The ability to produce, hire, invest, and build institutions that outlast any single election cycle. Political participation and economic development are not competing priorities. They are two halves of the same strategy, and this series is about understanding both. If what you just heard resonates with you, then you are in exactly the right place. This channel exists to study money not simply as personal income, but as a force that shapes families, neighborhoods, institutions, and ultimately freedom itself. We are not here to celebrate individual wealth as the finish line. We are here to understand how economic power actually functions at the community level and why that understanding matters more than most conversations about progress ever acknowledge. We examine how capital moves, how institutions are built, how leverage is created, and how ordinary people can participate in systems that typically operate without their input or awareness. Every video in this series is designed to give you frameworks, not just inspiration. If that mission speaks to you, please subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Share this with someone who is asking the right questions but has not yet found the right language to answer them. Now, with that foundation in place, let us move into the first substantive question this video is built around, which is what economic power actually consists of when you look beyond individual wealth and personal financial success. So, let us be precise about what economic power actually means, because this distinction matters enormously. Economic power is not simply having a few wealthy individuals within a community. It is the organized ability to decide what gets produced, who gets hired, where capital flows, who receives credit, and where profits ultimately go. Those 5 decisions shape the material conditions of everyday life far more than most people realize. Now here is where many conversations go wrong. There is a persistent confusion between income and power, and they are genuinely not the same thing. A high salary inside someone else's institution is a real achievement worth celebrating. But that salary does not automatically give you authority over hiring decisions, investment strategy, or the long-term direction of that organization. You are compensated well, but the structural decisions remain with whoever owns and controls the institution. Income flows to you. Power determines the rules of the flow itself. This is not a criticism of earning well. It is simply an honest accounting of where decision-making authority actually sits, because understanding that difference is the foundation of everything we are building toward in this conversation. To understand why income alone falls short, consider what visible success actually reveals. When a handful of people reach prestigious positions in law, medicine, finance, or government, those achievements are genuinely worth celebrating. They represent real sacrifice, real talent, and real progress. But here is the critical question. Does their success automatically reorganize the conditions surrounding everyone else in that community? The honest answer is no, not automatically. Millions can remain underemployed, undercapitalized, and structurally excluded even while a select few climb impressively. Individual advancement and collective hardship are not contradictions. They can exist simultaneously, and often do. This is precisely where the income versus power distinction sharpens. A salary, no matter how impressive, is consumed and must be earned again next month. Economic power begins the moment that income converts into something durable, assets, institutions, and enterprises that keep producing opportunity long after one person's career has ended. The goal is not simply personal elevation. The goal is building structures that generate opportunity for the next generation, independent of any single individual's continued presence. Now that we understand the difference between income and power, we need to talk about what happens when a community sends someone into office without building the economic foundation underneath them. An elected official does not walk into negotiations as a free agent. They walk in as a representative. And the weight they carry in that room depends heavily on what stands behind them. How organized is the constituency? How much capital does it control? What institutions support it? What can it actually deliver or withhold? When that base is weak and fragmented, something uncomfortable happens. The title becomes impressive while the leverage stays thin. A politician can hold office and still have very little structural power because the people they represent have not yet built the organized economic capacity that makes demands credible. This is also why campaign season attention should never be confused with permanent power. Candidates need votes, so they show up. But after the election, influence belongs to whoever remains organized, funded, and present. Attention without organization fades quickly. To understand why economic organization matters so deeply in political negotiations, consider two communities approaching the same city hall for development resources. The first community arrives prepared. They bring organized business associations, legal counsel, detailed financial data, and a comprehensive investment plan showing exactly how city resources would generate returns. They speak the language of risk, return, and institutional credibility. The second community arrives with something equally real: genuine need, lived experience, and legitimate grievances. But they lack the institutional infrastructure to translate that need into negotiating leverage. Both communities deserve attention. Only one can negotiate from structural strength. This gap explains why durable influence cannot be built on election cycles alone. Real power requires the ability to reward officials who deliver good policy, resist officials who pursue harmful policy, and remain organized during the long stretches between elections when most actual decisions get made. Showing up every 4 years with votes but no organized economic presence means negotiating without leverage. The community that stays organized, financially literate, and institutionally strong does not just ask for a seat at the table. It helps determine what gets decided there. Now let us turn to a question that does not get nearly enough attention in conversations about community development. When a dollar enters your community, where does it actually go? Does it circulate through local businesses, credit unions, and institutions, generating wages and reinvestment along the way? Or does it exit almost immediately through purchases from large firms that reinvest very little back into that community? This is the difference between consumption and capital formation. Consumption means spending that satisfies a need and disappears. Capital formation means a portion of that spending becomes savings, equity, land, equipment, or employment that keeps producing value over time. Now, the goal here is not economic isolation. Modern economies are deeply interconnected, and no community survives by cutting itself off from broader markets. The real question is whether a reasonable share of what flows in gets converted into something durable. A community that consumes everything it earns and owns very little is economically vulnerable regardless of how impressive its income numbers appear on the surface. Financial literacy means more than managing a personal budget. At the collective level, it asks deeper questions about how households transition from consumers into investors, how small firms grow stable enough to become reliable employers, and how professionals use their expertise not just for personal gain, but as mentors and lenders within their own communities. Local institutions play a critical role here. When hospitals, universities, churches, and government agencies direct their purchasing toward local businesses that meet quality standards, they create demand that sustains those businesses and the jobs they provide. This is where individual success connects to something larger. A thriving business that stands completely alone is a fragile success. But a thriving business that builds supplier relationships, trains vendors, and sources locally becomes an anchor that strengthens the surrounding economic ecosystem. The goal is not charity flowing downward from successful individuals. It is interdependence flowing outward in every direction. When businesses build supplier networks rather than standing alone, personal achievement becomes community infrastructure, and that is when economic development becomes genuinely self-reinforcing. Now let us examine what might be called representation without transformation. When someone from your community receives an appointment or wins an election, the right question to ask is not simply whether they arrived, but whether anything structurally changed after they got there. Did hiring patterns shift? Did contract access expand for small businesses that had previously been locked out? Did credit become more available to entrepreneurs who needed capital? Were new institutions built that would outlast that individual's tenure? This is not a criticism of successful people. Reaching positions of influence requires real skill, sacrifice, and determination, and those achievements deserve genuine respect. The warning here is different. It is about the habit of treating one person's breakthrough as evidence that the underlying system has been repaired. When we do that, we stop asking harder questions about what the numbers actually show. A photograph of diversity can be arranged for a press release, while the balance sheet behind it tells a completely different story about who owns, who employs, and who controls capital. Symbols matter, but they are not substitutes for structural change. So we have established that representation alone does not automatically produce transformation. But before moving into what organized economic power actually looks like in practice, we need to name a distinction that clarifies everything that came before. Think of it this way. Access gets you into the room. Capacity determines whether you can shape what that room decides. These are two separate things, and confusing them is one of the most common strategic mistakes a community can make. Access without capacity is where tokenism lives. You are present, perhaps even visible, but the decisions have already been structured by interests that arrived better prepared. Your presence becomes decorative rather than determinative. Capacity without access is equally limited. You can build real organizational strength, financial knowledge, and institutional depth, yet still find the doors closed, the contracts unavailable, and the appointments blocked. Neither half is sufficient alone. A serious strategy has to pursue both simultaneously and understand how each one reinforces the other. This is the bridge between recognizing what symbolic representation cannot deliver and understanding what a constructive agenda actually requires. That constructive agenda begins right now. So what does organized economic power actually look like when it moves from theory into daily life? It starts at the household level, where families deliberately reduce destructive debt, build savings, and begin thinking like investors rather than just consumers. Entrepreneurs keep accurate financial records because you cannot grow what you cannot measure. Professionals share expertise, mentor younger people, and sometimes provide services at reduced cost to strengthen the broader ecosystem around them. Institutions audit their own spending and redirect purchasing toward local businesses that meet quality standards. Beyond individual behavior, organized power includes investment clubs pooling capital, credit unions offering affordable lending, land trusts preserving community ownership, apprenticeship programs transferring real skills, and business networks helping smaller firms cooperate on contracts too large for any single company alone. Perhaps most importantly, it means teaching young people not simply how to get a job, but how entire industries function, how ownership is structured, and how capital actually moves through an economy. That knowledge is not a luxury, it is infrastructure. Now, let us address something that quietly kills economic cooperation before it ever gets started. Blind trust. When people are asked to pool resources, share contracts, or build institutions together without any accountability structure, the arrangement almost always collapses. Not because the people involved are dishonest, but because unprotected cooperation creates conditions where dishonesty becomes tempting and suspicion becomes rational. Strong institutions solve this problem through structure. Contracts define expectations clearly. Audits verify that resources are being used appropriately. Performance standards ensure that participation means contribution. Conflict of interest rules prevent individuals from quietly benefiting at the group's expense. Transparent reporting keeps everyone informed and accountable. Unity is not the absence of standards. Unity is cooperation that standards actually protect. Demanding accountability is not division. It is the foundation that makes lasting cooperation possible. With that principle established, the path forward becomes clearer. The balanced strategy this video has been building toward combines 4 essential elements: protecting and exercising voting rights, building household financial stability, developing businesses and institutions, and pursuing public policy that removes unfair structural barriers. Each part reinforces the others. Before we close, one final warning. Personality politics is a trap. When everything depends on one leader, one donor, or one official, the entire structure collapses the moment that person leaves, retires, or is removed. Institutions outlast personalities. Systems can train replacements. Movements built on structures survive transitions that movements built on individuals simply cannot. So here are 3 questions to sit with this week. First, where does your money go after it leaves your hands? Second, which institutions in your community are you actively strengthening? Third, what asset or skill are you building right now that will still be producing value 5 years from today? If this conversation challenged your thinking, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, and leave a comment below with your honest answer to any one of those 3 questions. Next time, we are going inside the internal colony framework, examining how some communities remain economically dependent even while gaining political visibility. That conversation continues right here.